In September of 1942, Germany sent 4 of its newest, most expensive tanks to the swamps outside Leningrad. Every single one of them broke down before they could fire a shot. The commander on the ground had warned his superiors that the terrain was completely wrong for a 57-ton machine. He was ignored, and within 24 hours, 3 of those tanks were being dragged out of the mud by recovery vehicles, while the 4th sat abandoned in a bog. It was one of the most embarrassing weapons debuts of the entire war. But here is what nobody saw coming. Within a year, that same tank would become so feared that an Allied general had to ban his own troops from even talking about it. The mere rumor that one was nearby could stall an entire advance and send experienced tank crews into a panic. Its very name became a psychological weapon all by itself. This is the story of the Tiger I. To understand why Germany built this machine, you have to go back to the summer of 1941, when the Wehrmacht launched Operation Barbarossa and rolled across the Soviet border with thousands of tanks. The German commanders were confident. Their Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs had crushed everything in Poland and France. They expected more of the same. Then they ran into the Soviet T-34. The T-34 was a medium tank with sloped armor, a design feature that caused incoming shells to deflect at an angle rather than hitting flat. German tank shells bounced off its hull at ranges where they should have punched clean through. Panzer III crews, with their 50mm guns, reported hitting T-34s 5, 6, 7 times and watching the rounds skip off into the dirt. A Panzer III had to close to point-blank range, practically within spitting distance, to have any chance of penetrating the T-34's side armor. From the front, it was essentially impossible. The only weapon in the entire German arsenal that could reliably stop a T-34 head-on was the 88mm anti-aircraft gun, a massive piece of artillery that weighed over 5 tons, stood taller than a man, and was never designed to fight tanks in the first place. Using it against ground targets required lowering the barrel, removing the wheels, and setting up the cruciform platform, all while under fire. It worked, but it was not a long-term solution. And then came the KV-1. The Kliment Voroshilov heavy tank had armor up to 75mm thick on the hull and even thicker on the turret. Panzer crews encountered KV-1s that absorbed dozens of hits and kept rolling forward like nothing had happened. There are accounts from the Eastern Front of German anti-tank teams firing at KV-1s with every weapon available, including multiple direct hits from field artillery, only to watch the Soviet tank shrug off the rounds and continue advancing. Henschel designer Erwin Aders later admitted that there was enormous alarm when the Germans realized Soviet tanks were flat-out superior to anything they had in service. That alarm turned into an urgent demand from the German High Command. They needed a new kind of tank entirely. Something heavier, something with thicker armor, and most importantly, something that carried that devastating 88mm gun in a fully rotating turret, so it could go wherever the fighting was and kill anything it pointed at. 2 companies were given the contract to compete for the design. Porsche and Henschel both submitted prototypes. The turret for both versions came from Krupp, and both designs centered around the same principle, taking the 88mm flak gun that had already earned a terrifying reputation and putting it inside an armored box that could go wherever the fighting was. That 88 had already proven itself in ways that shocked the Allies. In North Africa, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had used batteries of 88s to devastating effect against British armor. At the Battle of Hafaya Pass in June 1941, 13 Dug in 88mm guns engaged a force of roughly 190 British tanks, including the heavily armored Matilda II. About 100 of those tanks were knocked out. The British called the 88 anti-aircraft, anti-tank, and anti-social. They were not joking. So when Germany decided to mount that same gun inside a turret on a heavy tank, Allied planners should have been paying very close attention. Most of them were not. Hitler personally pushed for the new heavy tank to enter service as fast as possible. He wanted it on the battlefield immediately, before the design had been fully tested, before the crews had been properly trained, And, before the engineers had worked out the mechanical problems that come with building a 57-ton machine around an engine that was already being pushed to its limits, the Henschel design won the competition, and by mid-1942, the first Tiger ones were rolling off the production line at Kassel. Ferdinand Porsche, who lost the competition, had been so confident his design would win that he had already ordered the production of 90 chassis. Those hulls were later converted into the Ferdinand tank destroyer, but that is a different story entirely. The Tiger one that Henschel built was unlike anything the world had seen in a tank. It weighed 57 tons fully loaded. It carried 120 millimeters of frontal armor. Its main gun, the 88mm KWK-36, could destroy a T-34 at ranges exceeding 1,300 meters, often before the Soviet crew even knew they were being targeted. The gun had a muzzle velocity of around 800 meters per second, which gave it an almost flat trajectory. At 1,000 meters, a trained Tiger gunner could put a round through a target the size of a doorway with roughly 93% accuracy. The crew consisted of 5 men: a commander, a gunner, a loader, a driver, and a radio operator who also manned the hull-mounted machine gun. The interior was surprisingly well laid out for a tank of this era. The turret had a full 360-degree traverse. The optics were excellent, and the crew stations were designed with enough room that the men inside could actually do their jobs without climbing over each other. For a machine built in the middle of a war that was grinding Germany's industrial base into dust, it was an extraordinary piece of engineering. But none of that mattered in September 1942, when the first 4 Tigers arrived at the front near Leningrad. Major Richard Marker, the commander of the 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion, had argued against deploying them. The terrain south of Lake Ladoga was heavily forested with poor drainage, thick bogs, and muddy roads that turned to soup after every rain. He pointed out that sending 4 untested 57-ton tanks into that kind of ground was asking for disaster. His superiors overruled him. Hitler wanted Tiger tanks in combat, and he wanted them now. The result was exactly what Marker had predicted. Thick mud built up between the Tiger's interleaved road wheels, a complex suspension system where the wheels overlapped each other in a pattern that gave a smooth ride on hard ground, but turned into a trap when packed with debris. The mud overstressed the drivetrain. 2 tanks suffered transmission failures. A third had its engine give out entirely. All 4 were out of action before they accomplished anything meaningful. Replacement parts had to be flown in from Germany. The second attempt on September 22nd went even worse. All 4 broke down again. It was a humiliating start for what was supposed to be Germany's wonder weapon. Soviet intelligence barely noticed the new tanks had appeared. But the Tiger's first deployment was not a failure of the machine itself. It was a failure of how it was used. And when the Germans finally put the Tiger in the right hands, on the right terrain, with crews who understood what they were driving, everything changed. The Tiger saw its first real success in North Africa, where the open desert terrain suited it perfectly. The long-range accuracy of the 88mm gun turned the Tiger into something closer to a mobile artillery piece than a traditional tank. It could sit at standoff distances and pick off Allied armor long before those tanks could close to a range where their own guns were effective. A British 6-pounder anti-tank gun needed to be within 500 meters to have any chance of penetrating the Tiger's frontal armor. The Tiger's gun could kill that same 6-pounder crew from 2,000 meters out. Reports started filtering back from the front, and they were alarming. Allied tank crews described engaging German tanks that simply would not die. Shells that would have destroyed a Panzer IV bounced harmlessly off this new machine. Gun crews watched in disbelief as their anti-tank rounds sparked off the Tiger's hull and ricocheted into the sand. Entire formations of Shermans and Churchills were being stopped by a handful of Tigers that appeared from concealed positions, fired a few devastating rounds, and then withdrew to alternate positions before anyone could get close enough to do real damage. The Tigers almost always operated in pairs, with at least one supporting vehicle standing by in case the lead tank needed covering fire during a withdrawal. Then, in February 1943, the British captured one. A Tiger from the 504th Heavy Tank Battalion, operating in Tunisia, took several hits from British Churchill tanks during fierce fighting at a ridge called Jabal Jaffa. A 6-pounder round struck the Tiger's gun barrel, ricocheted downward, and lodged in the turret ring, jamming the traverse mechanism. The crew could no longer rotate their turret. They bailed out and ran, leaving the tank intact. The capture of Tiger 131, as it came to be known, was considered so significant that both Prime Minister Winston Churchill and King George VI flew to North Africa to inspect it personally. The tank was shipped to England, displayed on Horse Guards Parade in London as a morale booster, and then handed over to the School of Tank Technology for exhaustive testing. What the British engineers found confirmed their worst fears. The Tiger was an excellent gun platform, with armor that was nearly impervious to everything the Allies currently had in their arsenal. Their standard anti-tank weapons were simply not good enough. And this is where the psychology of the Tiger became almost more dangerous than the tank itself. A phenomenon known as Tigerphobia or Tigerphobia began spreading through Allied units on every front. The effect was so severe that British General Bernard Montgomery took the extraordinary step of banning all reports that mentioned the Tiger's combat performance. He was worried, and rightly so, that detailed accounts of the Tiger's abilities were destroying the morale of his own tank crews. The fear was not irrational. Allied tankers knew the math. A Sherman tank weighed roughly 33 tons and carried a 75mm gun that could not reliably penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at any combat range. The Tiger's 88 could punch through a Sherman's armor at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Allied doctrine for dealing with a Tiger was to engage it in groups, with one tank trying to hold its attention from the front while others maneuvered around to hit the thinner side or rear armor. The accepted estimate among American crews was that it took roughly 5 Shermans to knock out one Tiger. If they succeeded, maybe 1 or 2 of those Shermans would still be operational afterward. That kind of math eats at you when you are sitting inside 33 tons of steel, knowing that the enemy can kill you before you can even get close enough to shoot back. It sat in the back of every Allied tanker's mind every time they rolled forward into uncertain terrain, and it made them see Tigers everywhere. Crews started reporting Tiger sightings when they were actually facing Panzer IVs or even Stug assault guns. A Panzer IV with extra armor plates bolted to its hull got mistakenly identified as a Tiger so often that intelligence officers began discounting Tiger reports entirely. The fear had become a weapon of its own. The mere possibility that there was a Tiger somewhere in the area ahead was enough to slow an advance, call for air support, and delay operations by hours. Then came Villers Bocage, and the Tiger's legend became permanent. On the morning of June 13th, 1944, 1 week after D-Day, the British 7th Armoured Division was pushing through the Norman countryside toward the strategically important town of Villers Bocage. The division, known as the Desert Rats for their service in North Africa, sent the 22nd Armoured Brigade ahead as a spearhead. The lead units of the 4th County of London Yeomanry reached Villers Bocage without opposition and parked their tanks along the road, stretching east of town toward a prominent ridge called Point 213. What they did not know was that 2 companies of Tiger tanks from the 101st SS Heavy Tank Battalion had arrived in the area the night before. Only 6 Tigers were actually operational. The grueling 240-kilometer road march from their base near Beauvais had taken 5 days, with constant breakdowns and the ever-present threat of Allied fighter bombers forcing them to move only at night. The commander of the 2nd Company was SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann. By June 1944, Wittmann was already one of the most decorated German tank commanders of the war. He had been credited with destroying 119 tanks, nearly all of them on the Eastern Front, during his time with the Leibstandarte SS Division. That morning, Wittmann went forward on a reconnaissance mission and spotted the British column from a concealed position. The Allied vehicles were strung out along the road in a long line, with tanks, half-tracks, and Bren gun carriers parked bumper to bumper. It was a tanker's dream target. Wittmann did not wait for orders. He did not radio back for reinforcements or request an artillery barrage. He attacked with his single Tiger. What happened next took less than 15 minutes. Wittmann's Tiger rolled out of its concealed position on the flank and began working its way down the column. He hit the lead vehicles first, trapping the rest of the column on the narrow road. The 88mm gun punched through one vehicle after another. British Cromwell tanks, which weighed 28 tons and carried a 75mm gun, were completely outmatched. Their rounds could not penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor. One Cromwell crew managed to get a shot off that struck Wittmann's Tiger directly, but the shell bounced off the hull plating without doing meaningful damage. Meanwhile, the Tiger's 88 passed through the Cromwell's armor as if it were sheet metal. Half tracks burned. Bren gun carriers were torn apart. Crews who managed to bail out of their vehicles scrambled for cover in the hedgerows on either side of the road while Wittmann continued firing. He then pushed into the town itself, rolling down the main street of Villers Bocage and engaging British tanks at close range in the narrow streets. By the time the engagement was over, Wittmann had personally destroyed up to 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns. He was eventually stopped when a British 6-pounder anti-tank gun hit his Tiger from a concealed position, damaging the running gear. Wittmann abandoned his crippled tank and continued on foot to link up with German forces. The British force was shattered. The 4th County of London Yeomanry pulled back to defensive positions outside the town, and the 7th Armoured Division's advance on Villers Bocage, which was supposed to help encircle German forces defending Caen, was stopped cold. The next day, the British withdrew from the area entirely. They would not retake the town for weeks. Now, it is worth stepping back from the legend for a moment, because the Tiger I was far from a perfect machine, and its flaws were just as real as its strengths. The 57-ton weight created problems everywhere. Most bridges in Europe could not support a Tiger crossing. The tank was too wide for standard European rail cars, so transporting it by train required the crews to remove the regular combat tracks and replace them with narrower transport tracks, a process that took hours. The Maybach HL 230 engine produced 700 horsepower, which sounds impressive until you realize it was pushing nearly 60 tons of steel. The power-to-weight ratio worked out to roughly 13 horsepower per ton, which meant the Tiger was not fast. Top speed on roads was about 38 kilometers per hour, and cross-country speeds dropped much lower. Fuel consumption was staggering. A Tiger burned through roughly 487 liters of gasoline per 100 kilometers of road travel. Off-road, the consumption was even worse. In a war where Germany was already desperate for fuel, the Tiger was drinking the equivalent of a small tanker truck just to move from one engagement to the next. Mechanical reliability was the Tiger's most persistent weakness, and it showed up in ways that no amount of armor could fix. The complex interleaved road wheel suspension that gave such a smooth ride on hard surfaces was a maintenance nightmare in the field. On the Eastern Front, Russian mud packed between the overlapping wheels during the day, and when temperatures dropped below freezing overnight, that mud turned to solid ice. Crews arrived at their tanks in the morning to find the suspension locked completely rigid. They had to spend hours chipping it free with hammers and blowtorches before they could move. Soviet partisans learned to time their attacks for those frozen mornings when they knew the Tigers would be immobilized. The transmission was prone to failure under the strain of the Tiger's enormous weight, especially during long road marches. The engine was thirsty, temperamental, and required constant attention from mechanics who were in chronically short supply. German heavy tank battalions depended heavily on civilian engineers from Henschel and Maybach, the companies that built the tank and engine, to keep their vehicles running. When a Tiger broke down in the field, it could not simply be towed by another tank. It took 3 18-ton FAMO half-tracks, working in tandem just to drag one Tiger back for repairs. If recovery vehicles were not available, or if the situation was too urgent to wait, crews were often ordered to destroy their own tank with demolition charges rather than let it fall into enemy hands. It took 300,000 man-hours to build a single Tiger I, nearly twice the labor required for a Panther and roughly 3 times the labor needed for a Panzer IV. The unit cost was 250,000 Reichsmarks, more than double the 103,500 Reichsmarks that a Panzer IV cost. At peak production in April 1944, the Henschel factory in Kassel turned out 104 Tigers in a single month. But that was the absolute ceiling, and it only happened once. Over the entire production, run from 1942 to 1944, only 1,347 Tiger I's were ever built. To put that number in perspective, the United States built more than 49,000 Sherman tanks during the war. The Soviets produced over 57,000 T-34s. For every Tiger that rolled off the line in Kassel, the Allies were building dozens of tanks to send against it. The strategic math was painfully simple. Germany could not replace its Tigers. Everyone lost in combat, abandoned in a ditch, or destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture was a loss that hurt at the industrial level. And the Allies knew it. They did not need to build a single tank that could match a Tiger one-on-one. They just needed to build enough tanks that they could afford to lose 4 in order to kill one. But here is the thing that cold production numbers never fully capture. When a Tiger was operational, when it was in the right terrain with a competent crew, it was devastating. The kill ratios tell that story. The 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion, the same unit that had suffered through that disastrous first deployment near Leningrad, went on to compile a combat record of roughly 1,400 enemy vehicles, destroyed against 107 Tigers lost. That is a kill ratio of over 13-1. The 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion claimed 1,700 kills against 252 losses. Across all Tiger units combined, the ratios consistently ran between 5-1 and 13-1 in the Tiger's favor. These numbers come with caveats. German kill claims were often inflated, as they were in every army. And the figures do not separate combat losses from mechanical breakdowns, which accounted for a large percentage of Tiger write-offs. A Tiger abandoned in a ditch because its transmission failed still counted as a loss, even though no enemy weapon had touched it. Still, the pattern is undeniable. In direct engagements, the Tiger dominated. As the war ground toward its end, the Tiger's window of superiority narrowed. The Soviets fielded the T-34-85 with an upgraded 85mm gun that could threaten the Tiger's armor at closer ranges. The British introduced the Sherman Firefly, mounting a 17-pounder gun that could penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at about 1,000 meters. The Americans developed the M26 Pershing, though it arrived too late and in too few numbers to make much difference. And above all, Allied air superiority turned any German tank on an open road into a target. Rocket-armed Typhoons and tank-busting Thunderbolts made daylight movement suicidal for Tigers, which is why Wittmann's battalion had been forced to creep through the Norman countryside at night just to reach Villers Bocage. Michael Wittmann himself did not survive the summer. On August 8, 1944, during Operation Totalize south of Caen, his Tiger was hit and destroyed. The exact cause remains debated to this day, with some historians attributing it to a Canadian Sherman Firefly and others to a salvo of British rockets fired from a Typhoon fighter bomber. Wittmann was 30 years old. His remains were not identified until 1983, when a construction crew discovered the buried wreckage of his tank near the village of Gaumsnil. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Tiger I had been out of production for nearly a year, replaced on the assembly line by the even heavier Tiger II, the King Tiger, which had its own set of problems. Of the 1,347 Tiger I's built, almost none survived the war intact. Almost none. Tiger 131, the tank captured in Tunisia in 1943, is still at the Bovington Tank Museum in England today. It was restored to full running condition and remains the only operational Tiger I in the world. It appeared in the 2014 film Fury, the first time a real Tiger had been used in a feature film since 1946. When it runs, thousands of people travel to Bovington just to hear the Maybach engine fire up and watch the tracks roll. More than 80 years after it last saw combat, the Tiger still draws a crowd. The Tiger I was not the best tank of the Second World War by any objective, strategic measure. It was too heavy for most European bridges, too expensive for a nation running out of raw materials, too complicated for field maintenance under wartime conditions, and Germany never built enough of them to change the outcome of a single campaign. 1,400 tanks spread across a dozen battalions on 3 continents could not hold back the tide of tens of thousands of Allied machines rolling in from every direction. On paper, the Tiger was a strategic failure, a monument to over-engineering in a war that rewarded mass production. But wars are not fought on paper. They are fought by men inside steel boxes who can hear the sound of an 88mm round screaming toward them at 800 meters per second. They are fought in the split second between seeing a silhouette on the horizon and realizing your gun cannot touch it. The Tiger's real weapon was never its armor or its cannon. It was the knowledge that if you were in a Sherman or a T-34 and you saw a Tiger, you were already in trouble. That fear followed Allied tankers from North Africa to Normandy and all the way into Germany. No other tank in history has ever had that kind of effect. If this story kept you watching, hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us which World War II weapon you think deserves its own deep dive.